This is an interview with Edwin John Walker, commonly known as Jack. It's Monday, June the 20th, 1994, and we're in his office in Regina. Good morning, Jack.
Good morning.
Thanks very much for agreeing to take time to talk with me today about the profession that you've dedicated your life to, with the exception of your undergraduate degree, but that was pretty much related.
Yes.
Can we begin with where were you born and when?
I was born in Winnipeg, Manitoba. How specific do you want now? Exactly. 1st of May, 1932.
Okay, good. And were you went to school in Winnipeg?
Yes.
Is that what you did?
I left Winnipeg when I was 10 years old. My father had a position at the Forest Nursery Station at Indian Head. He became the superintendent. So most of my public school and all my high school would have been in Indian Head, Saskatchewan, rather than Winnipeg.
And that's just about
60
kilometers
east
or
about
so?
40 miles if you're of the old distance makers.
Yeah.
And it was a wonderful place to grow up because it was just full of trees in the prairies, and that's their job was to ship trees to the farmers for the farm shelter belts. Plus, I did research on plant introduction, so I think I picked up my plant interest probably from my father and the exposure there.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
And then you went to the University of Saskatchewan in Saskatoon?
Yes, and I agriculture, specializing in horticulture. Yeah. And then after I left, got a degree there, I went up north as a young adventurer to a research station, a federal research station, doing work on meteorological records and crop yields and testing of various crops under the very northern conditions. This was at Fort Simpson on the Mackenzie River. And I was there for a little over 2 years and decided that I wanted to do some other things with my life. I was unmarried at that time. Then I came out in 1957 and was married and went off to school in California to take landscape architecture. I wanted to build things, I think, more than just study plant growth at that time. And there was no Canadian school of landscape architecture at that time, so that was about the closest, really, for the Western boys. Actually, Roman Fodchuk and Vic Chanasik and Ed Holyubovich and myself were the first Canadian invasion of Berkeley, I think.
How did you hear about the program there? How did landscape architecture even come to your ears?
Well, I don't know. I always knew about the designing and maybe even a California brochure of outdoor living. And also I think that Vic was a year ahead of me, Vic Chanasik, and I might have heard of it because of the Horticultural Association. His background was quite similar to mine. And through the Western Canadian Society for Horticulture, I might have heard about it that way. But I think my mind is going a little, so my memory may be failing me exactly on that point.
I don't think your mind's
But that's my first exposure, and it was quite a shock because my background was scientific in agriculture, and you were thrown into this kind of design situation. If I could figure out the question that they would throw at us, then you almost had it solved at that point. So I had to take
initial step that was hard.
like I had lots of credits in the natural sciences side, but the design was a new exposure. So I had to take a full 5-semester sequence of design to kind of get that.
And is that why you did like another undergraduate degree then? Is that why you did not go into a graduate program?
I don't think I would be qualified to go into a graduate program because I didn't have the design and some of the art history, which was your background too.
Yeah. And what did you find was the emphasis? What type of design was emphasized at Berkeley?
Well, it wasn't a broad generalistic approach, which I think is the trend now to become generalists. It was very specific to problem solving, like the outdoor living and this kind of thing. A lot of residential, really. But of course, Royston and Halpern were doing big Bay Area studies. There was both of that. My interest was not in studies, and it still isn't. You know, I like to build things, so probably me. I've not gone into doing quote study kind of thing. The course I enjoyed because they had a lot of visiting professors, like they could draw in the Bay Area, like the big firms could come over, Thomas Church, and as I mentioned, Halpern and Robert Royston. It was really a great exposure, and in a technical sense, it was very intense. Like we had the surveying and the building and the, you know, that irrigation. Like it was heavy. I thought as, you know, as a young student, or relatively.
Yeah.
So I found it very heavy. Plus the plant material was entirely new to me, a lot of it. Broadleaf evergreens and palms and desert plants also. May Arbogast and Geraldine Knight Scott, I was fortunate to have them. I would think Geraldine Knight Scott was one of the greatest plant combination teachers that I've ever met. And I was lucky to work for her for about a half a year after I graduated. I took an extra year as a practical. I was allowed to stay in the States at that time. The green cards weren't quite as tight, but so I was able to stay. And I worked for her, I think, 3 days a week. And I worked for a large nursery in Oakland, California. So I got the plant side of it too. That was after I graduated. The summers when I was there, I worked for a contractor in San Francisco named Jerry Rubin, and he was a pretty tough taskmaster, but he really taught me how things went together. You know, you got kind of lines where it just lines on a paper. If you understand the construction, it really frees up what you can do with it. Once you understand it, you can design anything with it rather than just putting it together and just staying with a standard construction. So I got good construction. I got all these other things, which in a sense made you of some value to an office when you, you know, when you left, which sometimes it's pretty hard for the kids to, you know, to be thrown into an actual working situation unless they built or, you know, had real good background training.
What were some of, when you said that the plant material was different, do you think that the different use of plant material and the design training, do you think that colored the approach that you've taken here in Canada?
Yeah, it's influenced it. You know, as you know, our plant palette is pretty small or restricted here compared to there or British Columbia and even Southern Ontario.
Yes.
But the way plant textures and forms went together, like leaf shapes and leaf colors and, as I say, textures, that was really my background for learning that and being attuned to that which is now kind of an automatic checklist for me as I get into design, like plant combinations and.
Do you think that kind of thing can be taught as well someplace else where there isn't that kind of plant material?
Oh yeah, like we still have that enough variety of forms and colors and sizes to do that. If your approach is contrast or not contrast, that's another influence on how you design plant combinations or colors or anything. Whether you want to make a shock statement of things are very different. Or whether you want to subtly combine textures. You know, there's places for both. certainly one to stand against the other
Mm-hmm.
is legitimate too as a contrasting approach. But
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you want a quieter situation. Yeah.
So, do you feel that that an American education was valuable
Hmm.
in Canada, or do you think that there's
Yeah.
yeah?
Yeah. When I was reading through your outline, really my influences, just because of a set of circumstances, is mainly U.S.,
Mm-hmm.
both from training, but also the route my career has taken me. I have never worked in a large office.
Hmm.
I've never really had the influence or mentoring or guidance of a large office. I went to Ottawa after I graduated, and I was really by myself with the plant research group, uh, doing master plan work.
Mm-hmm.
And then I came back to Saskatchewan after 4 or 5 years there, and I'm the only landscape architect at Wascana Center Authority, and probably one of the early ones. Sigurd was maybe the first, but
Mm-hmm.
but he was of the old school, like the European school. So I was probably the first of the younger group at that time
Mm-hmm.
with North American trained.
What do you
So
think that not working in a large office has
I don't
the
I don't know
influence it
really.
has? Mm-hmm.
Um, it's maybe I would have gone broader, like bigger projects.
Mm. In
Maybe
terms
it
of
maybe it
scale?
yeah, maybe in scale and even complexity. Like they're getting more team approach and complex now than even when I graduated.
Yeah.
I think a small office could handle what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
Project planners was always, that group was, at least by myself, was held in awe, and everybody wanted to work for Macklin and project planners. Um, and they were doing some pretty big things. Brad Johnson and those groups were doing big things, which I never really got exposed to.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I don't know if it hurt me that much. It might have. I just don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think in some large offices you tend to become a specialist also eventually. You
Mm-hmm.
become the plantsman or the spec man well, not now because they have spec writers, or the construction man
Mm-hmm.
or the office like production.
Yeah.
So I don't know. But it's just in retrospect I realize that I've developed my own design philosophy pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
Floundering and, learning the hard way in a sense, not a lot of
Well,
guidance in that area.
and just reshaping it as you've moved.
Yeah,
No
yeah,
doubt.
yeah.
Yeah.
So then when I came to Wascana, I was by myself, and then I set up my own office, which is basically a one-man, though I've hired students
Mm-hmm.
in the summers.
Mm-hmm.
Like 5 or 6, maybe 10 years ago, there was a conscious decision: am I going to go big,
Mm-hmm.
or I'm going to stay where I am? And I suppose a combination of economics or whatever. I just decided to stay as a small office.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Can we just go back a couple of steps
Mm-hmm.
here?
Mm-hmm.
After you graduated from Berkeley, you
Mm-hmm.
stayed there. You said for a
A
year
year after.
afterward.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you came to the
Experimental Farm, Department of Agriculture in Ottawa.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And while I was there, I took leave and got a master's at Ann Arbor.
Okay.
So I finished there in 65.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you said that with the Department of Agriculture that you developed plans for the Central Experimental Farm.
Yeah,
what is that?
It's a big green area right in the heart of Ottawa.
Oh,
Like the Sir John Carling building and all the research buildings are there. It's on the Rideau River there, or Rideau Canal. Yeah, the canal, I think there. So I did that, and they had an arboretum, and they wanted to develop a national botanical garden with satellite gardens in the different regions, like BC and Southern Ontario, but it never happened, that I'm aware. But they wanted to represent all of Canada, to be able to have this kind of botanical reference of things all over the country. And then I did the site planning was these research stations, like if they get a new building, or I would do the landscaping and site planning for that.
But there is a National Botanical Garden in Ottawa,
Yeah,
the main one.
it's the Arboretum. I think they call it the National Botanical. It's the Arboretum, which is basically part of the grounds that relates to the river's edge there as you go south through the park. Yeah.
And did you actually design any of these satellite arboretums across the country?
I think I had designs all over the place. I never did on the garden specifically. It was mainly the research stations because they were real projects at that time.
Yeah. It's too bad that that kind of regional approach
Yeah.
didn't.
It's probably picked up a little in the research stations if they have a horticulture or an ornamentals person on staff or a plant research person, that they probably have the information in a sense of plant collections, and these people did all the collecting, like in the north too. Like they have the herbarium, where they put the sheets and things for the plants. Yeah. So they have all that in Ottawa. It was a plant research institute. Yeah. So in that sense, they have documentation of flora. Yeah, but it never got, well, the funding probably wasn't there. Yeah.
And that was in about
60s.
In the early 60s?
61 to 66. I came out here in 1966.
Okay. And so, and then as you said, during that time, you went to Michigan.
Yeah.
And got a master's degree.
Yeah, right.
Was there a speciality that you did during that program?
Yeah, well, the emphasis was on construction. I had a choice. I did fairly well at Berkeley, and I had a choice to go to Harvard or to Pennsylvania or Michigan. And they said they'd sometimes waive tuition. But I heard that Harvard was a jury system, and I don't know, for some reason or other, I didn't want it. Though a lot of the great ones have gone there. The Canadian ones like Walter Kim and Macklin, I'm sure, and Don Graham, I think, all went to Harvard, and I enjoyed the construction, and I heard that Walter Chambers at Ann Arbor was good in construction. In fact, Jack Milliken was working. He was teaching for Walter Chambers when I went there before he came back to teach at Guelph. In fact, he taught me construction. I was probably his age or maybe a year or so older, but he taught me construction. And so I chose Ann Arbor because I probably said already I like to build things. Yeah. And it was a good course, yeah.
Who were some of the other teachers that you had there?
It's getting phasey, but Chuck Cares, I think, was the plantsman. And of course, Bill Johnson was just a super designer. William J. Johnson Roy out of Ann Arbor. Like, he was tremendous. I found him a little busy with his practice to really sometimes do justice to the students. That's my personal opinion. But like, he did spend time with 2 or 3 that obviously had a graphic, maybe, high design talent. Yeah. And
how long was that program?
That was 2 years. Yeah, like 2 fall to spring, and 2 7-month semesters.
Why did you do that? Did you? When you were in Ottawa, did they suggest that you needed a master's degree?
No, not at all. I just, at the time, I was doing a lot of designing, and I got a little upset that nothing was being built. So I kind of took this opportunity to take a leave of absence and go and do this, just as kind of a refresher course and things like that.
And then you'd probably feel that with that additional education, you could then push projects into directions.
Well, I certainly could have, actually taken them over in the field and had them built. Yeah.
Because at that time,
Yeah.
there weren't a lot of people running around with master's degrees either. So
No, there were a few coming out. Yeah, there was. I think I was the only Canadian maybe at Ann Arbor. There were quite a lot of the kids went undergrad there, like Hilderman, and awful lot of, and maybe a master's. I'm not sure if some of them got a master's there, but quite a few came down to the undergraduate program at Ann Arbor. Yeah. No, it's funny you should say that because there was actually a fellow from Egypt there doing a doctoral program. And I think it was on floating cities or something. I'm just not sure if they were envisaging a land shortage or around Cairo or whatever. I'm not physically familiar with the situation. But there's very few doctors. Like it is an applied profession.
Not generally a research.
And I don't think that many of the teachers have doctorates in landscape.
I don't think so either.
Yeah.
Not that I've heard of it.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah,
so I just, I'd only had really the two and a half years of landscape when I got my bachelor's. Because I did it in 5 semesters in California. Just picked up the design series.
Yeah. And so then you graduated from there in 65? And did you come right here to Regina?
No, I stayed with them. I had an obligation to stay with them for a period. And then Joe Moran was the director of maintenance and development here at Wascana Center. And his background is horticulture. He's retired now. An honorary member of the Saskatchewan group, by the way. And he'd kind of followed my career for quite a while, and he came down and asked me if I'd come back, because he was moving up to executive director, and he wanted me to come back and take over his position. We had an engineering and a maintenance, and he was afraid that if we didn't get some landscape influence into the development of Wascana Center, that the engineering of the hard stuff may take over. Thomas Church was the advisor to the Wascana Center Authority, and Yamasaki and Church did the master plan and then we were elaborating it. Like as each year we'd design another phase, upgrade it, and irrigation, lawns, and shaping and planting and functional elements.
So when you came here then in 66?
It had been going since 62.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And so then the work by Yamasaki and Church had happened.
That had happened in the formative, like there was a whole act passed to protect the development of this area. Like funding was it was untouchable. Like the capital couldn't be changed unless they changed an act of the legislature. So there was so many mills were allocated. There was 3 participating parties: the city, the university, and the government. So that was a fixed capital funding that we had to work with. Then the maintenance was another assessment that was almost fixed. It's changed now. They're suffering, as everyone else is, with cutbacks in maintenance. But we're doing great things. I think we had 5-6 million a year to work on, as I recall.
What was the original vision? Why did Wascana Center even begin?
Wascana Center started because the University of Regina came into being, and they needed a site for a campus. So there was a switch occurring that the research station, the old federal agriculture station, needed a new site, and the university needed a site, and there was a concern that the grounds around the legislative building were going downhill in maintenance, and a lot of uses were coming into the land that shouldn't have been in there. Like not educational, not government, not health, and just there's too many encroachments. So it was to protect what was happening around the lake, a concern for that, a combination that the university needed this land, and the city needed a site. So we came together, and we just a whole bunch of things that caused them to set up the Wascana Center Authority.
How much land does it have?
It's 2,000 acres.
Hmm.
Yeah, right in the center of the city. Not all developed.
Mm-hmm.
Some is farmland across the other side of the bypass, mainly surrounding the lake. I would think there's 300 acres developed with fine lawns and features and picnic areas.
And then the initial master plan, was that for basically that whole area?
Yeah,
master
but
plan
since I came, they acquired more after I came. They
More
jumped
land?
the bypass and got another 300 or 400 acres
Oh,
because there's a need for there's a big hospital out and a science YAS, kind of a technical science school, and so they've acquired more land and to protect to hold it. Like they were deep in expropriation hearings at that time. Like big bucks to get this land, and every little, like some were actually city lots, almost deep lots along the creek, and just every one of those had to be purchased, and some were expropriated. And in fact, the Wascana Center Authority Expropriation Act was more powerful than the Highways Act, which is unheard of in this country. Like they knew they had to have that power to do it.
well, you say they had the backup of the province and the city.
Yeah, and in fact, the university was, if you look at cut to the bone, it's provincial money too. A lot of it, or was. It's not a private school.
Yeah. How much influence did Thomas Mawson's work have to do with any of it?
Thomas Mawson had a great influence early. Like he set out the grounds, but more immediately around the legislative building. He could not envision the scope of the holdings that eventually they would take or the changes. And that might have been a bit of concern that there was land across the lake that was part of Mawson's conceptual plan where the lieutenant governor might live, that he'd sail across the lake and open up the legislative, except
not on January 4th.
They didn't realize that February that there's, but anyway, it was a grand scheme, and he just produced them holus bolus traveling across Canada.
Yeah. About 1912, 1913, and in that range?
I would think so. The buildings were built in 1904. I think finished in 1908. But amazing tribute to the confidence of the early pioneers. Like we dicker now to get a atrium in a building because it's going to cost another, $100,000 to have public space that's nice in a building, and these guys built this. It's unreal. Timidity that we face sometimes today. Yeah.
So what some of his design ideas then were incorporated as the basic?
I would think, I don't think so by the time Yamasaki and Church came along. I would suggest they might have been respected and analyzed, and then we moved on from there. Yeah.
And then after Church and Yamasaki did the master plan,
you
said that...
our job would then, and the other thing I'll just mention on the act was that advisory boards were created along to support the act. There was an architectural advisory board, engineering advisory board, and a landscape advisor, who I think is Hugh Knowles at this time. I'm just not sure.
Yes, it is.
And Michael Huff has been one, and at different times they've had to. And so the other thing was that I guess the staff was to cause things to happen and to cause building to occur. Like if a new building was proposed within Wascana Center, it had to be consistent with what that area was zoned for, be it educational, recreational, or government. And that would come in a submission, and the staff would do a review, myself included, and everybody else. And then the architecture advisory boards would sit, and then there'd be a very rigid, formal submission, like models, presentations, drawings, all submitted for review. And this committee would hear the presentations and give comments or say yes or no. And Yamasaki I was only there for about 2 or 3 meetings that he was there, and then he was out of the picture. And Thomas Church maybe 3 or 4 years. Anyway, everything had to be reviewed and approved by the architectural committee before it was allowed to be built. And that was the buildings. I personally didn't get involved that much, except I was at the meetings and I learned a lot. Maybe that's one of the biggest influence I had, was learning to speak all these languages because of these review committees, and they had really good people on them, I thought. So I learned a lot that way. And then the landscape plans supporting that, or independent developments, we did that, and we had to submit them too if we did them ourselves. They usually retained outside architects, of course, for the major building submissions, or the client would, but a lot of the landscape work was done by ourselves. We didn't retain landscape architects to do the quote soft things, maybe memorials, grading, roads, plantings. So then the engineers would review the submissions, and the landscape advisor sat as a member of the architecture advisory committee. So that was kind of the control which kept the standard of architecture up in the building. And we were building things, like the university was building buildings at that time. It's been quite a while since a new building was built. The Wascana Rehab Hospital was maybe one of the later ones. And I was in private practice with it, so I worked on that one. Quite a few of them.
You were actually with the Wascana Center Authority then?
9 years, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Till 75.
1960s.
Yeah, 66 to 75, yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So as an employee then, so when you were doing this work, it was as an employee?
I was director of maintenance and development, so we had to review and put together things. Yeah.
And then when you were on your own as a consultant, did you also consult back to them?
I did some work for them, yes, and a lot of work would come. I'd be associated with an architect making a proposal or submission. I would be on that team.
But up to 1975, the
I
majority
was
of the
staff
work was,
review, and design.
And that was the bulk of the development of Wascana Center? Or was there a lot done after 75?
Yeah, there's been some done, yeah. I think, there's certainly been things done. But that was the busy time, to my mind, was 66 to 75.
Did someone take over from your job after
Yes. An engineer moved up to that position. I quit. I got into that's okay. I got into a disagreement with the union. I'll be up front with you, and I raised hell and showed poor judgment in some people's eyes, not my own. So I decided, no, I'm not. My job is to get work done and things done. So I left, and then the engineer moved up to that position, and he has since suddenly moved up just recently to executive director, I think. Like, he's gone to the top position. And then I brought in a young landscape architect to fill the superintendent of development position, a young fellow from Montana, U.S., Ken Dockham is his name. So he's still there, Ken Dockham, yeah. You probably know Ken.
I don't know, but I know the name.
Yeah, he came in, I think, 72, and then I left in 75. We completed jobs. The summer games were here. We completed a marina, a track, all-weather track, and a support building for the track. And I stayed till that was complete, and then I left. Yeah.
And then started
Habitat Design Limited.
And how is it that you came up with that name?
Well, I think Habitat was kind of what I was dealing with. And I hoped design was part of it, and I realized certain limitations, that there were greater creators than I was. So that's where the name come from, plus the balance of, graphically, the balance.
Mm-hmm.
of the name.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And you took on an awful lot of
Yeah.
great variety of projects.
Anything, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Anything visual outside the buildings I'm concerned with and I'll take on. And I was a young fella trying to get an office going, so you didn't pick and choose too much.
Mm-hmm.
And every project is very important to the client, so there are no small projects in my, at least I try not to.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you're tired the odd time that you have to kick yourself in the rear
Yeah.
to get up for the game, but
That's hard
yeah,
to do.
yeah.
What were some of the or what's one of the what you consider to be one of the main projects that you did,
Oh, gee,
regardless of
that's really tough. I suppose recently the Wascana Rehab Center over here, the hospital,
Mm-hmm.
in a sense that I was involved right from the start, and I still am involved with it, which is kind of a nice way to be. It was built on an old nursery, the Wascana Center nursery.
Mm-hmm.
So it involved a survey of the trees and an assessment of what to keep and what not to keep. It involved the presentation of a landscape design philosophy relative to that kind of a facility, like care and rehabilitation. Very close association with the architects all through it. I established the building elevations and did all the site work grading and layouts.
Hmm.
So it was kind of neat. Like I did the elevation siting and the design and backed off and then moved in with the landscape later. So both interior and exterior too, which is kind of nice.
Oh, good.
There's some interior spaces.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so it was good, like as a total involvement.
What you said just a second ago, you said the design philosophy developed as a result of the facility, the care and
Well, like
rehabilitation.
the visual and the outside, there were little courtyards
Mm-hmm.
where they can recover, be tested, and we talked about sculptures because of the farm background of people. We tried to, it hasn't happened, but we wanted to have kind of elements like wagons and kind of sculpture, whatever, pieces that would help people recall their childhood and feel of worth, that sort of thing, you know.
What are the ailments that people would suffer?
Well, they're injured, like
Uh-huh.
workman's compensation injury. The veterans are there. They have that's really their home. One of the wings is their home, and plus, you know, farm people that are there for prosthesis and you know those kind of things. It's a rehabilitation, and a lot of children, like children that are physically disabled, go to school there and almost live there. You know, some of them. So it was.
The work that you did inside, then
There's courtyards on a street, a main street. Grant, I think architecturally that was the architects did the main input in the street, but the relation, the indoor, the outdoor, and there are some interior trees and things.
and is there
yeah.
any particular type of plant material that relates to like medicinal plant material?
No,
or anything
not
like that?
not really.
Uh-huh.
No, it's that wasn't consciously done. It's not like a pharmacology garden or anything like that. But no, just something that would survive and give a little color, and as it matures, it'll make some interesting spaces.
And then when you say the design philosophy relating to that, is more the idea that living plant material is there and thereby helping to help people feel better?
No, I don't know as the design philosophy is related that strongly to the plants. I think it was the layout of the courtyards and the shade structures, and they could walk. And there's for example some little areas of raised vegetable where the wheelchairs can come up. That kind of thing. The plants are certainly the color combinations, but again hardiness and has to be the key. And there's an interior court which offered a little more chance to try things because it got a bit of shelter like lindens and a little more chance for that. But it was just being able to have the discussions, with the architects and designers in this area of thoughts of recall of people that are starting to get, just it was a good input for a landscape architect to be able to do that and be respected, I think, in comments.
And
then the supervision was pretty constant. Site supervision had an influence on that. And as I say, we did all the grading was done. I did all the grading, catch basins. That was nice to know, like the how and the size of the pipes wasn't, but it was nice to have control of all the rest of that, the actual layout and grading.
And so then your work then had to go back through Ken. Would he?
Yeah, the whole project went through these advisory committees, and Hugh knows more than Ken, though Ken would feed in. They do a staff review, which is fed to the landscape advisor because he's not here. Like it's just, but that all has to go through and be approved. Yeah. So that's one. What else? Oh, I'd have to pull out. You'll have to pull out my list. I just CBC building, the work with Cliff Weens, it's just he was a great architect. Is. Won some awards. Water Tower, which was a combination of architectural and engineering and landscape, which we were allowed to do some different things.
Where was that located?
That's in North Regina.
Oh.
I don't know if I listed things here.
The Northwest Reservoir and Park?
Yeah, that's right, yeah. There was a fear of the residents. The residential came quite close around this big reservoir. There was a bit of a fear of the people adjacent, as you have water under pressure. But we were able to wrap the landscape high around the back to create sliding hills for the kids and mask the apparent height of the reservoir, plus protected by land mass, and made a great park around it. And then the cladding was designed by an architect, and it was very successful what you can do when you start initially with the different disciplines. Because there's one right across the highway which is god awful. It's okay now, but there was such a contrast in what can happen. So we won awards for that one.
And that's also, too, listening to the people who live there
who
were saying, I'm really afraid of this.
And of course, I think we're hired sometimes as the guy to take the flack, sometimes by administrative. The initial hiring is not for great design. It's to be able to make them the scapegoat, and if it happens to come out as a nice, great design, then that's a bonus. I think a lot of projects, bread and butter or whatever, are just to get approvals. There's no great, just to meet the approvals. There's no great intent to have a Taj Mahal that's going down in history.
Or even if you have a philosophy.
Yeah. But sometimes you're lucky and it really turns out. Government House was an interesting one because of the restoration, trying to find materials, surfacing materials and other things that were kind of the period, 1921. Like we kind of gravel driveways and things, so we went to exposed aggregate, and then we had to research the old plants and perennial borders. That was a little different in a heritage sense. Just another new learning thing for me, another facet of design.
This was researching both the construction material of the house as well as...
No, I didn't do the house. I worked with the architects. BLM architects did the renovation of the building itself. But the outside grounds, try to find the old plans.
Were there some?
There were some, but I had to go to the period to come up with forms of the old circular beds and the philosopher's walks. A lot of perennials. A little bit of work finding out what catalogs were available and what the West was buying in 1920s, and not a big deal, but it was just another interesting exposure.
Would they have gotten material from
Yeah, to Toronto. Even
was it when did
well, I think 1904 Indian Head, but as far as the catalogs, like the McConnell's or the old mail out. Eaton, that was Eaton's catalog era. I think that's where the Prairie people got things. Lilacs are pretty limited. I think the Caraganas probably came in when Indian Head got going because of the farm shelter belt. That's what that was intended, not for urban plantings.
Yes.
So a lot of perennials and a lot of tough stuff like that.
What were some of the other perennials?
Oh, there'd be the daylilies and peonies, I expect.
Bleeding heart.
Well, I'm not so sure about that at that time. Irises, probably those. Lilies probably were coming out. And roses, which would, of course, die back every year. The stuff coming out of Ontario would have a hard time surviving. The lilacs, though. And, I'd
be a very interesting project.
I can't recall what. And then we had to, we simulated a boardwalk at the territorial building, which was kind of tricky to, but that was characteristic of the cities. After they get out of the mud, the next step was boardwalks along the storefronts, and then finally we got some drainage thoughts coming in. Instead of puddling and. But personally, between you and me, the engineers have not, on the prairies, they have not evolved too far to realize that 0.5% backyard lot slopes doesn't work in Regina. It's first of all, they're too shallow. Secondly, there's not many guys that can build them, and our clay soil doesn't stay that long. As a third point, that it's so my parks drain well if I have any influence. Parking lots. So anyway, now what was that? Now what were the projects that influenced me?
Yes.
Where is that? Last page?
No. I think it's still on kind of the end of page 1, beginning of page 2.
Let's see. Gosh, I don't know. Scar Street Mall was kind of interesting. That was a recent one. But the role was quite limited. It was just the planting and construction of planters and kind of drainage concerns. Yeah. I suppose FUD, the guys that influenced me, if that's a concern, was I would think FUD Chuck did because of his design ability, his graphics. And I suppose I was always a little envious of the graphics because I'm not a flashy designer or good on graphics. I can kind of get things built, but I recognize the work. But the flashiness of presentation is maybe not there. Yeah, Roman was always kind of, I really looked up to him in a design sense and an idea sense. Yeah, and I guess some of the others, Patterson, I think Hilderman, some of those guys are pretty good graphics people too.
Doug Patterson.
Yeah. Or Gary, I'm not sure where the design came from, but and they had successful offices at the time that I was coming back to the prairies. Yeah, so. And as I say, Hancock, everybody wanted to work for him. He was kind of held in awe. Don Graham, he was quietly doing good work in Ottawa, the National Capital Commission.
A very nice man, isn't he?
Yeah, very quiet. And, so. But then I think other than that, it was, it was mainly U.S. that influenced me, or my training at school and stuff like that.
Are there individuals in that really stand out in your mind? You mentioned the
Yeah.
Geraldine Scott.
Yeah, well, she does, because that's where I learned the plant combinations and really attention to detail. And she was doing quite a bit of residential, and no, I just think she insisted on fighting with clients to get that detail in, like left in design. She wasn't satisfied with backing off if they thought it was going to cost too much, or it was kind of, they didn't understand it. She was pretty tough and good. But she was really a pioneer in California, and the reason she was so good at that time, as a woman, you had to be better. You know what I mean? Well, I suppose, yeah, and I'm sure it's the same now. But at that time, you had to be better because you were a woman and you were coming in the profession. And I've always tried to be better, in the sense that I don't want people calling me and I have to call them. I say I have to check and I'll call you back. Like, I've got the answer when they call. So I tend to keep on top of things more than is apparent sometimes, maybe. I probably appear quite laid back, but I'm very.
That calm exterior.
I'm laid back, but I guess I'm prepared, because maybe I don't want to be embarrassed. Or, yeah.
Not a bad reason.
So anyway, that's the way I work. So May Arbogast influenced me because of the plants, but that was kind of shock of all the plants I had to learn. Like, I'm sure I learned 400 or 500 plants in California. It just blew my mind. But I learned them well, because I might have gone to British Columbia to practice. Who knows where I would go, and they have a lot of broadleaf evergreens there.
Sure.
Which brings me to another point that may be of interest, that I think landscape architects have tended to put down a knowledge of plants. Whether they're afraid to be labeled as plantsmen. And I think it's a mistake for the young kids that do that, whether the schools are doing it or what it is. There's a whole general trend to make them generalists, which is fine, I guess, a broader view. But there's got to be somebody that can, at some point, put it together in actual fact, in actual physical construction. So, but this point bothers me about the kids, and I don't think it should be the be-all and the end-all, but I don't know what they have different than architects and engineers if they don't have plants different. Like, other people understand space and colors, and artists understand colors and space and impact and focus. And so I don't know why they don't learn all that, but still have the upper hand in the plants. And I'm talking culturally, whether they'll survive, combinations, seasons, and and even spell the names right. So that's a concern. And I understand where they're coming from. They don't want to be horticulturists, but it's kind of it's an overreaction, I think. Something they should all really know a lot of and try things. Plus the other, like, only 10% of my practice is plants, I'm sure, as far as time involved in a design. So, but I've been lucky that I know plants. Yeah, and I try new ones on clients, and I tell them, well, might not live. Don't know, but they do it sometimes. And the suppliers and the nurserymen are mad at me all the time, which is good, because I keep asking for things that they don't have. But if I don't, then they never will. They will lose them, kind of. Yeah.
That's very true.
So that's, I suppose I'm getting into the educational field a bit there.
But that's important, and I think...
And they've got to be able to build, like, they've really got to know how to put things together.
And is that's from the knowledge of the plants or from a design background?
Well, I'm leaving plants and going into construction now.
Mm-hmm.
Even
Mm-hmm.
you know, you've got to have an expertise that nobody else has, either in grading and land forming and those kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, you save the client. You got to be able at some point to say, "I've saved you money and future problems," and those are the areas where you do it.
Mm-hmm.
Is in grading and construction. Yeah, the conceptual, certainly it's important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I hope we're taking the kids past conceptual and the generalizing, the big grand schemes.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't understand it, frankly, you're going to get screwed by a contractor big time. Yeah.
There does seem to be, though, that kind of focus that there's more of a movement toward master planning.
Yeah, and studies.
Yeah, doing sort of the large-scale spaces rather than the details of the actual development.
Well, I think the money's there to be made maybe in that kind of a scope. Eh?
Mm-hmm.
As long as there's a bridging of it somewhere. I would think the undergrad program initially was designed to make you a practitioner, maybe a technician, if I can use that word. Mm-hmm. Maybe the vocational schools, NATE, and maybe they're putting those kind of people out like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like I consider myself just a technician a lot of the time, with a little broader view and design sense, conceptual.
A good technician.
Yeah. Well, I better be. I've been around long enough.
Yeah, you hone those skills very well.
Yeah, so. And then I think traditionally the undergrad was to kind of produce a good technician or a good practitioner. Mm-hmm. And maybe the post-grad was, I would think, make him a broader thinker, a generalist. Mm-hmm. And I just don't know what's happening.
You don't have any contact with
I don't now.
At all?
No, I used to, no, really I haven't. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I taught at Saskatoon as a sessional, but not since '84. Mm-hmm. And it was not really a group that I was just really introducing them. It was a horticulture group into exposure to landscape architecture.
Are you contacted by any of the universities regarding your opinion about where they should be going with their programs at all?
No, but I'm sure they have lots of people telling them. Like I'm sure Shinasik and Graham and a lot of these guys are taught. Brad Johnson. Mm-hmm. And they've been there. Like I'm sure they were about my vintage. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I would hope they're feeding that in. But I just see Manitoba would be the only one I really have much contact with. But I don't know anymore what's happening.
Yeah. And they need that. I think that's an important part. School can't function without knowing, without being in touch with the professionals in that field to find out where the professionals think the profession is going. Yeah. You can't keep operating in a vacuum.
Well, I think it may put out graduates that, are hard to place.
Exactly.
Because a small office like mine, for example, can't afford to train people and bill those kind of hours out. Yeah. Not to a lot of clients you can't. Maybe on some bigger jobs you can't. Mm-hmm. And I would hope that they don't all have to go into government practice.
In order to,
where the billing and the productivity or production isn't maybe that critical. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And are we producing too many? I suppose is the question that every profession's asking itself.
What do you think about that? Where do you?
I don't know. I see kind of in this area. No, I was going to say I see kind of a retrenchment that people aren't retaining landscape architects, but that's not true. They are seeing a value from them now. Mm-hmm. but I'm just not sure if it's like teachers. I'm just not sure how many more we can produce. And it's probably a cycle. Like, it's probably a cycle. And it's got to be frustrating for these kids to get out in the world. And like when I graduated, hell, I had jobs to choose from. So this is a terrible situation for the young people.
What do you think that their future is? Do you think that they're going to have to do something different, or
I don't know. You got me. What? Maybe that's why we're getting into so many areas. They've been forced to go into the generalist. I do what I can. I have a little niche that isn't really what I think of as landscape architecture. Like, I juried a thing in Winnipeg, I think it was last January, the competitions. And my God, it just blew my mind. Like, there's art in the landscape, there's landscape in the art, there's, and of course, a great emphasis to communication now, in planning brochures. Like, and this is my prejudice, and you probably want these different kind of viewpoints in your interviews. But what I would call landscape architecture would be, or with the kind of landscape architecture I would like to do, would probably be under 20% of the submissions, like design submissions that were really design of projects. So maybe this is a result of the generalists, and maybe they can get jobs better if landscape architecture takes a broader form. And that's fine. It's just not my bag, and it's just not my period. So it's, maybe that's the way it's going. But I hope it isn't being accompanied by indecisiveness, this kind of never land of studies and this and that it's not a societal direction that really nobody has the guts to say yes or no, or that maybe this isn't quite right and maybe we should look at it again. Like, you can be a generalist and, nobody makes a decision sometimes. But I don't know.
What do you see as your own future? Where do you
My future is to just build things that are correct and be around for a little while. Hopefully they inspire people a little bit, and make them feel good and lift them up sometimes. And I just want to leave some things that are built environment. That's another concern I have. There's a design council in Saskatchewan, and so much of the awarding is not for a built environment. It's for communication. It's for a graphic, like what the committees say, paper architecture. It looks so great on paper, but when you actually see it built, yeah, I think maybe we need more good examples of built architecture and built this and that. A little more commitment from the politicians to build something lasting. But I'm happy to see things built. Like, I just could not study things and study and study and study them. My life's too short. That's probably why I left Ottawa, actually. Like, I had all these plans, and if nothing's happening, I'm gonzy.
Well, as you said, having the idea of regional botanical gardens, and never seeing anything even move toward construction. What's the
you can't.
What's the point?
You got to move on. At least I had to move on and do things. Yeah. So I'm old-fashioned. I'm out of touch, I'm sure. Though I do have teenagers, but I have all ages, 32 to 13. Our little one's 13. It's mine, hers, and ours. Yeah.
That's quite a range.
Yeah, that's right.
But do you think that I'd like to maybe just get some kind of clarification as to what you think that young landscape architects can see for a future. Do you think they can do what you've done? Do you think that the profession has changed a lot in your...
I think that certainly they can do what I've done and probably do it better. I just think they may have to learn a lot of it on their own, maybe a little more. You know, like if they don't come out of school with it, they'll certainly learn it. I mean, it may be unpleasant or but they'll certainly learn it and then they'll grow and do great, yeah. I'm just not sure there's the training ground for them now. I don't know what the offices are doing, the large offices. Maybe they're hiring, and you probably know better than I do. You know what, but again, it's the government isn't doing big projects. And I think the large offices are traditionally and will have to continue to be the training ground for them under current conditions, economic-wise. The other thing is that when some of the larger offices, I think, are cutting back, what happens to the people that have been with them quite a while? You know, they go out and set up their own small office like I have. So they probably won't train, and it probably further dilutes the large office, like they do take jobs. And so I guess it'll all shake out. I'm an optimist, but it's the kids. You know, what does it do to the kids that try to get a job for a couple of years? I mean, it just develops a hopelessness. So that's a concern. Fortunately, our kids are all working. One, well, not really. One is a pilot and one's in dentistry. And so I don't think he'll have trouble. No. He'll have to set his own business up. Yeah, so I'm not answering your question.
No, that's well, but
I think your point about the schools, maybe, I don't know if they're talking to what's happening out in the practitioners or what their views are, or whether they're tailoring their course to put kids out that are hireable, more hireable. Maybe the vocational or the NATES are further hurting the chances of the degree kids. Because they know once they get out, they can draft and they can produce.
And the companies can hire them at a much lower rate than they can somebody who's got a degree.
Which is
unfortunate. But
So.
Do you think that the design, the landscape architecture profession has changed substantially from when you started? What has changed about the nature of the profession?
Well, I think they are becoming broader, like generalists. Since I, graduated, the environmental impact study is a big part, I think, of some offices. And I have no qualms with that. I think sometimes they're flogged to death because common sense and a good perception of a land form really answers a lot of things without producing volumes and volumes of reports. And another prejudice is that I resisted computers because, certainly, first of all, because I don't know how to run one. But when I was at Michigan, I saw a trend of some of my classmates that design was becoming all paper. It was all becoming reports. And I had a bit of a fear that I think design is more than that. That sometimes you get so limited in producing reports that you lose some intuitive or some fun, maybe some fun input.
Or as Don Graham calls it, the magic.
I think computer tends to be kind of a very disciplined, precise, and you could lose it. You could lose that kind of frivolous thing, that one frivolous thing in the design. And I think another concern is maybe and this is nobody's fault, but there's so much accountability now that it may be constricting people to take a chance in design. I mean, you can't make a mistake, eh?
Mm-hmm.
Architects are being, or I think rumors that if they make a bad cost estimate, they could be liable, and you know, if your estimates are, you don't get commission.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if it's a combination of risk. You know, I mean, my God, they're taking all the risk out of raising kids, or we're trying to. We have these handrails and slope, and you know, all these regulations. And I'm over in Greece at a hotel overlooking the ocean, a resort hotel where children are present, and there's one pole about this high and about a vertical one every 20 feet. You know, and nothing. I mean, there's a madness a bit to society on, you know, life is a bit of a risk.
That's right. Yeah.
So there's a lot of regulations, I guess what I'm saying, become the design guider.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you can get so constricted with meeting all these that, my God, you're exhausted or the design's done because it's safe. So, but I can't, you know, I still have to go by those rules sometimes. Not as much in the areas that I work, maybe. But
also with maintenance.
Maintenance is flogging. It's like the custodians designing the buildings and the blah, 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 and the garbage men are telling you what. That's right. It's the tail's wagging the dog in a lot of cases. So, but maintenance right now and economics it's the bottom line, which is terribly frightening. My clients, when they write the design program for me, I just tell them we got lots of money. You just got $1 million and you get all the land you need. So give me what you want, and we'll fit it in from there. But anyway.
But it is difficult. The economic. I think that's one of the major differences.
Yeah.
From when you graduated and when you started working, then today that's certainly a major constraint.
Yeah, the roaring 80s, eh?
Yes.
Yeah. But I don't think I've changed my design philosophy on, or my arguments to clients that, you know, low maintenance is a little higher initial capital input, and I don't think they've resisted that or changed. You know, certainly society's changed, that obviously both parents often are working, so, and maybe the interest in horticulture's dropped. That would be a bit of a trend. But there's still those that enjoy the gardening, and even I just tell them that you could enjoy it for 4 nights and work at it for 1 or something. So you still have that range of client that's interested in plants, and some that have been forced maybe to work and they can't quite do all that. But I don't think it should affect design. Not if you can present your arguments.
That I think probably only comes with years of experience.
Yeah, well, certainly, I agree. If your confidence comes, and you can say some things that a young guy can't. Young person can't.
Politically correct, if you don't.
I don't care about politics. I've never worried about being politically correct. I've never worked that way, and I never intend to. They know what I can do, and if they want me, then. But again, as you say, that's a luxury that you can't have as a starting up person. But I could care less politically in that sense. Yeah.
It's a good way to be able to be.
Yeah, and I'm lucky that I can, because as my uncle would say, I'm too old a cat to be screwed by a kitten.
I'm glad I've got that one on tape.
Pardon the language. Pardon the language. Yeah.
Just kind of a little bit on that topic, but a little bit off.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a Canadian landscape architecture? Do you think there's any such thing as Canadian landscape architecture?
It's coming. Um, I think we're still influenced by the old land, quote, or features of the, other places. In fact, I just talked to the Mackenzie Art Gallery about, is there a prairie landscape style? And I don't think there is yet. Like there's a bit of British formality, there's a bit of Jensen's natural prairie stuff. There's, Italian. I think a lot of the people still coming to Canada want features of the old country. So, and I don't know if we'll ever have a style that you could call prairie unless it's a very functional style, like shelter belts and food production, and I think California is an influence. Be it, I don't care where anybody was trained. Like people have time for doing things in the backyard, and the outdoor living is coming in. So, and it's too soon, I think, and I don't know if it'll ever happen. How do you define it? I don't know. Yeah. Like, and a lot of it is magazine influence. Like anything goes. Like, and also, it used to be that a style evolved because of the available products of the region. Like there was stone, and the Mediterranean is stone and dry, and courtyards and water for shade and those kind of things. And the tradesman grew up, family after family was a tradesman who worked in that materials. Well, that isn't true anymore in the prairies or in Canada. Everything can be prefabbed and shipped in. Like it's a wide open ball game for material. Mm-hmm. And the tradesmen, they don't build, they really assemble. You can have metal fences, you can have pavers, you can have, it's all pre-manufactured, and anything goes anywhere. So I don't know how you get a style once you leave indigenous material and indigenous craftsmen. I think a style is pretty hard to define. And the only thing we would have that's prairie is the plants that would survive as being unique to this area. That's the only really limiting factor. At least people think it is. I mean, some of the materials brought in don't work because of our soils or cold or spalling of materials. And, so weather influences.
What about the country as a whole? Do you think there's...
I don't know, Linda, whether... BC is obviously a mix of California and Japan. I think, water and slates and pavers, and probably those would be the greatest influences up that side. And I don't know, Toronto, I think anything goes. Privacy or protection in the residence is probably becoming a factor of design. Again, like a different kind of protection from physical harm and vandalism, whereas out here it started as protection from the elements. But I think I can't define a style. No, the strong, I know the features, the factors that influence the design are, the horizontal line, the strength of the prairie line, and the snow and the patterns of drifts, and the high light here, at least for us, has got to be a consideration. And the social, on the social side, I don't know as prairie people are too imaginative. They're learning. I think they appreciate beauty when they see it, but it may be hard for them to initiate that. Then they're still, they're very cautious, and that's still a influence of the bad times in the 30s.
Do you think that caution comes through in design? Do you think that
The caution comes through in, not so much now, but the older clients that I have, it comes through in a, for example, my God, I've spent $600 or $700 or $1,000 on a design and I haven't seen anything yet. You know, like it's on a piece of paper, so
yes.
value for money. Eh? Then even on the bigger jobs, my God, I spent 20 or 30,000 and there's nothing above the ground yet. You know, like the irrigation and all the upfront costs are hidden. It's, I don't know if we're still evangelizing or what out here, but I don't know. It's kind of neat, interesting.
Interesting. The things that you're saying lead me to, well, what I'm hearing is when I ask about a Canadian style, you immediately spoke regionally. And maybe that is what's Canadian about Canadian landscape architecture.
I mean, I would certainly see that's going to happen. Probably concepts could be similar, but when you get down to the material and the exact expression, it may change a bit. Canada is a regional country. I don't get uptight about any of this. Well, I do. I get uptight about separation. I get uptight about. But I don't see what's so unique about it, because you look at Europe and you look at Africa and I mean, my God, it's just the way things go. Little countries form and pass along and more come, and this is a huge country. Yeah. So, and I'll bet there's a French style. I mean, they're just so different in, you know, enthusiasm or expression and thought, and I'm sure the church is very important, whatever influences that has. Like the Jesuits had to be some of the greatest site planners there were, when you see where they place churches and command of a community or an influence. I mean, my God, it's amazing. So, you know, maybe the native culture is gonna become a great influence on design in the prairies. Like soft forms, soft spoken, oral people. I just don't know. That's an unknown to influence at least the prairie style. But I'm sure it's as valid as anything else. It's I think style will always be very hard to define in Canada.
When I asked the question, your answer, your first words were, it's coming. Do you think that Canada is just not old enough yet to have landscape architecture tradition? Or do you think that it's landscape architecture itself is not an old enough profession in Canada? Or
I don't know. When I say it's coming, I don't know if it'll ever come. Or I don't like not to be able to say that it evolved here. I mean, there's no way you cannot have the influence of Europe and centuries of this and that. Like it's coming. I'm sure it's coming. But like, how long does it take for the Greece, the formalities of Europe and Italy and the use of water and shade and, you know, the Moorish country? I mean, centuries and centuries. And they may say the same thing. I don't know how, if it's our style or who started. But the key is the materials and the craftsmen and a more closed community, I think, develops styles, definable styles. And I think we're just a melting pot out here. People bring it from everywhere.
And as long as the communications are as they are in this day and age, magazines being published
Yeah.
every
Well,
day,
certainly, yeah.
then
And you can buy a design,
sure.
and you can buy the materials from anywhere.
Yeah, a person like Roberto
Yeah.
Burle Marx,
Yeah.
his work in
Yeah.
Brazil
Yeah.
is known
Yeah.
all over the world.
Yeah, I like it.
Mhm.
I do a little bit of it.
Dave,
Try to.
yeah.
Painting.
Fortunately, he
Painting
passed
on
away
the
2
canvas.
days ago.
Did he really? Eh?
June 5th or 6th,
Yeah.
he died.
Yeah.
Has had a tremendous influence, and
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
everyone that I've spoken with, just about has mentioned his name.
Yeah.
And so there's certainly nothing Canadian about
Yeah.
his work. But I think what is Canadian, perhaps, is how that work has been interpreted
Yeah,
in the
that's
Canadian
sure.
landscape.
That's right. That may be it. How it's been, slotted into our conditions.
Mhm.
Eh?
And what
But I don't know why we
ideologies-
worry about it. I mean, what's a style?
Doesn't
What's the difference?
Mhm. That's a good
Like, what is
question.
landscape architecture? Is it? I think it's probably a job or profession where you do the best for your client, and in part, at least my little narrow the way I work. So what's the difference? If leave them laughing, it's you've done something right. Unless you want to be a crusader, then that's a different ball game. You can quietly work to make people aware of what can be a contribution from this kind of background, whatever you want to call it.
Mhm.
That has a balance or respect for function and nature, and I think balance is the key, which is, great environmental arguments all across the country, and there's a balance of jobs versus timber, and balance of costs versus pollution. I mean, it's we're not going back to the dark ages.
No, that's
We're not
we
gonna.
need to deal with that.
Kids need work, and I suppose everybody has their pet peeves, and certainly all valid. But who's going to determine how's it going to be? So, yeah, it's quite a different, wide-ranging profession. I sometimes think maybe we should learn our own a little better instead of thinking we know everything about everything else, like graphics and environmental issues and art. Maybe certainly these all contribute, but maybe your first point should be you damn well know what you're doing about, as best you can, and then branch into influencing other areas. And I think the profession may get more mileage that way if there's an obvious expertise, and as opposed to not wanting to learn plants because somebody's going to think you're a plantsman. I mean, why, do that one and get that finished, and then move on to a little broader viewpoint. But we still have to prove ourselves. And but I think some have a pretty negative attitude of what they're doing, or I mean, what people think of them. Always on the defensive, maybe. Why?
What contributions do you think landscape architects can make to
Canada? Okay. I would think maybe a less brutal society, in the sense of if we don't do something, it's going to be it's going to be an engineering economic solution to everything. Yeah, and that's not unique to what we're doing, but I think that's one contribution, a little like it used to be a gentler society, in a sense. I think that and a more comprehensive approach, I think, to projects comes from the landscape architect generally.
more comprehensive in terms
well,
of they can,
in bridging nature to the construction sometimes.
Mhm.
Yeah, but a softer kind of more humane solution.
You're suggesting engineers aren't humane?
Well,
No,
no,
I'm just-
I don't know. I think they have very narrow outlook.
But
Like, and it's well, and it's got to be dollars and cents,
Yeah.
and again the safety factor mentality is always there. I mean, if a wall 8 inches thick is good, let's make it 12 to be sure. Like it's not designed like Mayart and some of these guys, these Swiss bridge designers. I mean, beautiful things and nervy with this thin shell roofs and like and again, it's just bloody accountability and risk. They're just afraid to.
You don't think that also stymies the landscape architect though just as well?
No, I don't think so. And fortunately or unfortunately, our work is not so physically critical. Like buildings fall down and trees lose a branch, but we don't have quite that kind of. It's advantage maybe that they can't document our damages as high, or they don't have as many standards maybe of safety in our profession. And that hurts us too because our value decreased. Like a lot of the costs and the salaries derived are based on a fear factor. I don't care what anybody says. Like you pay a doctor, you pay an engineer, you pay, a lot of them are overpriced. Maybe I'm the best in my profession as there is. I can say that. Nobody else here to argue with me. So why don't I get as much money as the best of his profession? But that's not the way society thinks. Like hard times, a doctor will still have a job, but the landscape architect he'll be on his way out, but he's had a hell of a lot more fun in the process when he was working than a doctor, I think.
Well, a doctor might have a lot of fun too.
Well, he might.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Do you think landscape architects should be in roles of policy decisions? That if there's that kind of
I think they should be on more committees and boards. Yeah.
And that way, thereby.
Well, on these review things like the National